Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm going to host this panel tonight. I've got 4 or 5 questions here to ask, but we want to make sure you guys get your chance to ask some questions too. So if there's anything burning that you want to ask, just yell out and pull me aside. But first question we'll hit straight off with is, let's start with the market leader. So Bitcoin, over 2021, we heard lots of people talking about the king, narratives like Bitcoin as a store of value, Bitcoin as an inflationary hedge, partly thanks to billionaire hedge fund managers like Paul Tudor Jones and companies like MicroStrategy. So clearly Bitcoin's failed at being those things in the past 6 months. But my question is, in terms of the long term, do we still think that these narratives will hold true? Who wants to kick that off?
Well, yeah, we do know the narrative of Bitcoin, at least that's kind of been dominating over the past, few years, even though it's about 12, 13 years old these days. Has been, to this idea of separation of state and money, essentially. I think if that is to ever happen, that is a multi-decade process. The events of the past 6 months with the, looming recession potentially, but the heavy drawdowns in equities and crypto, as well as the tightening monetary policy, that's definitely, I think, too early to tell whether Bitcoin will succeed as a store of value or inflationary hedge. So TLDR is too early to tell.
Matt wrote the question, so his answer's already ready to go. I think if you look at any other market as well, particularly tech stock, it's not just crypto that's taken a hit. We've got Snapchat and other tech stocks also trading like shitcoins. It's not just crypto, and I think it's the early cycle already in crypto. That we do have a long way to go, and I think the volatility, the 24/7 market, and the forced selling we had in June with all the shenanigans with 3AC, Celsius, BlockFi, etc., with all forced selling, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum is probably holding up relatively well in my opinion, all things considered. So I'm still remaining long-term bullish, short-term pretty bearish with the macro environment.
For me, I think Bitcoin has probably been a victim of its own success in some cases. When we think about sort of the institutionalization that we've actually seen, which has probably caused much of the sell-off of the correlation to equities. I think it's just been treated as a risk asset by a lot of these institutions. If you think those institutions that are getting involved, they're selling it as they would sell the Nasdaq or any other tech stocks at that time. So, to the question of the store of value and the inflation hedge, it's going to struggle to be an inflation hedge when it's ultimately being traded as any other asset. But obviously, as a store of value over time, as we said, decades away, but that finite supply is going to continue to be one of the key drivers of that, and I think that will be really important over time. But for the time being, until we sort of see this correlation sort of really move away from what we've got with equities, I don't think we're probably going to see it being classed as an inflation hedge in the short term.
So I'll talk about it from a perspective of venture capital, because it's a great indication of where the institutional money is going. And from what I've seen and the research that I've got available to me, the increase in deals was about 621 from Q1 to Q2 this year in terms of institutional money investing in these crypto projects and these crypto funds. And I think that's an indication of the longevity that they see in the space. And in terms of the actual monetary value, it's stayed pretty much on par. So if we're able to withstand that in a bearish market and we see it staying steady, it's a great indication of what will happen when the market and the consumer and investor sentiment picks up again. And naturally, market leaders like Bitcoin will be the first to reap those benefits. So,
yeah, good work. So, okay, good. Next question. So, each of you guys have been through a bear market before, but what advice would you have for any new investors that are out here who have not been through a bear market?
Buy the dip, don't buy it. Again, My number one piece of advice is just to not just go off the previous market cycles, like top 10 crypto assets by market cap, for example, because there's always like new innovations that you see that ultimately like flush out, call it 6 of the top 8 or whatever, and they get replaced by these new sorts of projects. So well, you go back as far as like 2013, 14, when you saw those Namecoin, all those sorts of ones that were basically trying to be like Bitcoin. Then we saw the old ICO innovation, started like ERC20s and all that. You saw a bunch of, those sorts of ICOs projects who were proven to the top, and now a lot of people don't even know they exist 4 years later. So my advice would just be, don't try to assume that all the stuff that's fallen by 80 to 90% so far will automatically come back up and hit all-time highs, because the last couple of years we really only saw a handful, call it 10 or a dozen, that really were able to surpass previous all-time highs.
Good, mate. The other one for me is don't get fancy. I think, me included, when the market's down 70 or 80%, start to think I can now short the market because everyone else is shorting the market. You see the traders on Twitter making money while you're bleeding out. And I'd be a fucking terrible trader if I was a trader. 95% of people shouldn't be trading, in my opinion. It's a hugely emotional, volatile market, and it's really tough to trade. For those that do, you're trading up against the best that have been there for a long time. So it is a market that you do need to just hold on for dear life. DCA, I know that's boring, but it really is a good time. I think it's undervalued right now, Bitcoin and Ethereum, if you're looking 5-10 years ahead. So don't get fancy is my tip.
Mine would probably be to look at it from not an equity standpoint, but in terms of when investing in stocks, the sort of the fundamental side of it. When you first bought Bitcoin, or if you bought Ethereum, why did you buy it? Are you buying Ethereum because of its blockchain technology, the future it can hold? I think from my perspective, it's hard to see a future with pretty much anything without blockchain technology, without smart contracts, etc. So why were you buying that asset in the first place? So that's fundamentally changed from the reason when you first purchased it. And like a stock, if the valuations change, if the cash flows change, or something is fundamentally changed, then there's probably a reason to maybe not look at it anymore. But I think in that perspective, it's sort of taking out the sort of price action, taking away the volatility. Don't look at the price and just think about why you've ultimately bought that asset, and if it's something you truly believe in. And as we say, these projects don't necessarily all exist. The ICO phases, etc. We sort of flush that out. So remember the reasons why you were buying, and if you're still confident in that, and if that hasn't changed, then for me, that's a great reason to still be investing into that asset.
Yeah, pretty much in line with that, all those points, but the last one particularly, the underlying utility of the technology we're talking about here is not only now known by us, but a much broader market than the first crypto winter, which is extremely important. You've got Ethereum, which is incorporating math-based trust across industries that we haven't seen before. That's not going away. You've got Jack Dorsey throwing a curveball with Web5 out of nowhere built on Bitcoin infrastructure. That's not going away. So these are things that are here for the long term, and as long as people understand that utility is still there, we all have a shot, and we should all continue with that sentiment we had at the very beginning.
Get your questions ready, get your questions ready, get your questions ready. I'm coming after you soon. But good point you talked there about the underlying technology. So we all know crypto and blockchain still have a lot of outstanding problems. So in the next 12 months, what are the areas that you guys see will be most crucial to see progress? So I'm talking here about scalability, product UX, which you all know's floundered, and even regulations. Where are we at with those?
Yeah.
Or anything else to add?
Where do you start? There's a lot of areas we can improve, both as an industry and then just the market structure. First thing that comes to mind might be a recency bias, but I would really, 12 months from now, love to see scalability solutions become like a lot more advanced. I still think it was probably pathetic's too strong of a word, but like the fact that late 2021, early 2022, we were still having to pay, call it what, $100 to $300 US equivalent in ETH to transact on Ethereum. Like, even though it's been around for 6 years or so. Pro, it's really good because there's a lot of demand, but still like a lot of work to do where it's really just pricing out, at least with respect to Ethereum, pricing out the vast majority of, I suppose, the global population. So things like Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, like probably about another 5 that you could reel off there in terms of they're all have brought out their solutions past 6 months. Skip ahead 12 months, I would love to see like just the activity and transaction volume on those solutions really pick up to make me, I guess, pretty happy with where we've come as of today.
I think education for retail investors is a huge one, or anyone in the market.
You would. Oh, while we're there, Ben, do you want to explain what your business does? There's a lot of people in there may not know, but you know, give it a quick run.
No, so I've seen firsthand, close people to me really lose out on crypto. Like it is a place that new people come in, they get really excited in the bull market, they buy in November last year, 60,000 US Bitcoin, and now they sell at 20 because they think it's going to zero. And it just happens over and over again. And until people really have understanding of their assets and investing, I don't think we can really move the needle. So now, honestly, we have a lot of free stuff over Collective Shift if you want to check out. If you're new, I've met a few people that haven't even invested in crypto. The in real life events bring out those people because it's just a bit of a safer environment than Discords. But you can head over, we've got hundreds of resources, beginners courses. It's a great site to get started. So I think education for me.
I think probably regulation would be, especially for if we talk about retail investors, if we talk about education, I think regulation would be huge. Also just to sort of protect the retail investor. We obviously saw what happened with UST and the whole sort of Terra Luna situation. I think to try and eradicate something like that, again, it's going to be difficult. How do you regulate something so decentralized such as Bitcoin and Ethereum? So I think the regulators are going to have a tough job on their hands, but I think to try and do it in a way that sort of protects retail investors, but also doesn't sort of stop the technological side of it is going to be really important. And again, it's going to sort of be a tightrope in how the regulators do that. But I definitely think what we've seen probably from UST and especially this bear market, I think is probably, we talk about sort of what happens in bear markets, and I think we're going to continue to see advancements, whether that is in regulation, whether that is in the upgrades. And I think that's one positive that can come from this, is that we probably will see more regulation, which is going to protect everybody in this room from things like that happening in the future. And I think, as I say, if we can do that in a way that protects retail investors but doesn't stop what blockchain can offer, then that's going to be really important.
I think the big thing that I'm seeing at the moment, just speaking to both sides of the ecosystems, founders and investors, there seems to be a massive market gap in this 95% of people. You have the traditional finance, the decentralized finance that they've thrown for a number of years, and now they're starting to compromise on both ends, which is really important. So the technology and the projects that come out of that compromise, I think are going to be very exciting, especially as regulation comes to the table. How is traditional finance going to bring their liquidity on chain? And how is decentralized finance going to make it accessible to the masses? And to have both those things occur and what will emerge from that is going to be extremely exciting. New projects, new technologies, and a whole new wave of user experience that only we've seen yet, which is just opportunity.
Great. Now, has anyone got any questions that they're burning to get asked? John, I think you had your hand up earlier. I know, Lucy, did you have a question? Lisa's got a question. Awesome. Lucy, get that question ready. John, I know you've got one. I think Jake mentioned he was going to ask a question earlier as well.
And you knew my name. My question is a little bit facetious because I love all of you very dearly, and my big question is, how do we get more women into the space? Like, honestly, we did a Web3, Women in Web3 event on Thursday night, and that's what we were talking about, and now we have this, which is awesome because I love you all, but how do we raise the bar in Australia and get more women on panels like this and more women in this industry?
Great question. Great question. Women in blockchain would love that one. So, gents?
slick question. My mind immediately went to the emergence of NFTs that we've seen in the past 18 months, 12 months. I think that has started to build momentum because up until then, really the only application so far of crypto has been, well, A, tons of speculation, and B, you could say DeFi was probably the only thing that really saw some decent usage and rise. So that was really just one pocket of society, which is really more like, I guess, people with a finance and tech background. But what I love about NFTs is that they just hit so many more areas of society, creatives, artists, and there is some really good web, as I'm sure you're aware, some women-oriented or women-led projects out there, like BFF from memory, Hug is another one. So these sorts of communities, women in Web3, of course, starting to all of a sudden have found their way into crypto, that we now have this broader umbrella that encapsulates NFTs, which 18 months ago didn't really exist. So we're gaining momentum, and hopefully next time we can have some women represented up here as well.
That was a faux pas, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to say that's my fault.
Absolutely.
No, that is my fault. I'll put that up.
Lisa, there's a spare chair here if you'd like to.
No, it does come down to people who run the events, and I'll put it on me.
Yes, and I've been land posted for it several times as well.
Yeah, no, dead set. So I promise next time, and for future events, we'll fix that.
But anyway, I've got a question here, and it's Lucy. Your turn, darling. Thank you.
Thanks so much, panel, and for putting on these drinks. It's actually one that I asked earlier because I was actually a moderator at the panel at Wholesale Investor earlier, and it's something I'd like to ask you guys. So I'm from a marketing background, and I find customer very, very important. And there's been a lot of risk mitigation issues, as we know, in the past, so how do you gain more trust in the space is something that I'd like to ask the panel. I think there's a lot of lower market confidence at the moment, so how do we gain more trust in this space to make other people more trustworthy in terms of our industry?
I'll probably come back to the point I made earlier in terms of regulation. I think that's really important in that sense. That's a big trust factor, especially from our point of view here at eToro. We're obviously a regulated firm in Australia, but there are obviously, unfortunately, there's still a lot of bad actors in the space. So I think that's really important in terms of gaining trust and bringing something in. As I say, having that need to sort of protect a retail investor, but being able to sort of facilitate everything that we can offer within the space, I think would be really important. And I just think communities as well. Whether it's events like this that you can sort of put on to sort of build trust and meet people face to face. Obviously, everything we know is decentralized and a lot of it is online, etc. So if we can sort of bring that and put names to faces and actually build a trust in that sense, I would say that's really important.
Yeah, I think the dinosaurs of the centralised industries that we're all such fans of are doing us a world of favours in terms of bringing people into this space. I spoke on that panel with Lucy, and I alluded to a point back where I'm from, my family from Lebanon, and I found this out the other day. Top 3 blockchain talent worldwide. I'm like, what the hell's going on there? And then I'm like, okay, well, the government's dissolved and we don't have good central bank in place, and the banks have halted quite a few times over the last year, and these are the sort of drivers, the fallibilities we're seeing in these centralized institutions are just really bringing people on. Now, the other aspect is explaining to these users and potential end users that there's actually a lot of the time no need to trust. This is the point of our industry that we're in. We have trustless technology. This is how it works, and explaining those mechanics may actually have them on board a lot more sooner. We may even be able to skip that element. So that's going to take a lot of education, breaking it down, turning it into layman terms, which is just on us as pioneers in the industry to do. So.
Good. Any more questions? Okay. Yes, one over here. Did you say something? Jake, come up here, Jake, please. Come up the front. Come on. Big round of applause for Jake Kenny. Before Jake asks his question, I want to ask Jake a question. Jake's just spent a couple of months, or maybe 3 months, travelling the US, working hard. But Jake, what was happening over there? Tell us, what's the top 2 or 3 things that you learned while you've been travelling, doing blockchain, crypto events, parties, etc.?
You got to at the parties. I think that there was probably a couple of things. The timing didn't help, like we were turning up as things were blowing up. One thing I think it changed the sentiment when we got to Permissionless, which was a really fantastic event, and they'll be back next year with a bigger event in Austin, was everybody was already starting to get wrecked in Terra Luna. And in terms of the energy for the audience was great because people stopped walking around like assholes thinking they're geniuses because it makes a bunch of money. Or everybody had a sense of reckoning. And so I think that it's all relative. So I think everybody got a bit of a taste of what that looks like. I think Night 2 was sponsored by Terra, and so the 750,000 yacht that they'd sponsored was gifted to Avalanche, I think, as part of that experience. But I guess it was a really sort of good way to sort of kick off that period of time in terms of what people wanted to focus on. So a lot was around building, a lot was around sort of the challenges of trying to justify where things go and develop in the space. I think the thing for me that was the most shocking was NFT NYC. Like, we went there just purely because we had a couple of partners there. It's NFTs. We focus on DeFi. Wasn't really our arena. The event itself was like a typical conference, but the surrounding events were just absolutely incredible. Goldman Sachs were hosting an event in New York, flown people in from all over the world to talk about digital assets. It was sort of the team within Goldman that were really pro sort of digital assets, and they brought all those thought leaders from around the world in for that conference. So meeting with people like that, S&P, NASDAQ, major players in the space were taking it very serious. So that was really interesting. I think, to the gender aspect of that too, I think it was a much healthier, just societal sort of pool. Was you just saw a more equitable sort of environment. So I think that's really interesting in terms of just what represents real society in the workplace. So that was encouraging for sure. And then just the energy around it. Like, people have lost tons. Like, we've fallen below $1 trillion in market cap for all the crypto, and yet here are people throwing multi-million-dollar parties, some really good energy around that. So I think from an innovation and what NFTs can do from an unlock of access and events and ticketing and all those things, there's a lot to be tapped into. I think it's probably a lot less financial and trading in NFTs than what people think it is. There's a lot of stuff about GameFi. It's like you connect a curve, it's a terrible interface. You connect that thing with your wallet, you are the exit liquidity. You just got to accept those facts. No one who's trading at a macro level is connecting on the front end of those sites. So there's a bit of a humbleness in all of that. So the NFTs more broadly is sort of like good idea, and we'll see that play out. But really humbling period for DeFi across the board. But we're seeing a bit of a reckoning there. And so all this to my point of the question.
Yes.
Interfaces. So Web 2 is coming into Web 3, apparently. We'll see. But Web 3 interfaces suck. We've learned absolutely nothing from onboarding new users. We launched a protocol on a layer 2 Arbitrum, and if anyone had that experience, it was terrible at best. It's gotten slightly better as Arbitrum's improved, but use any layer 2 and they're all pretty much terrible as an onboarding, and most of the alternative chains, if you've never had any experience with those as well. What have you seen outside of the world of crypto in terms of onboarding and user experience to get people, whether it's the buy now pay later category or neobanks or sports bet or whatever it may be, when somebody has a desire to invest or gamble, if that's what they're doing, what have you seen as really good experiences there that you think that people in the future might adopt?
Thanks, Jake. Anyone willing to give that a go? Interfaces.
Yeah, so I'll talk to you about this company after this panel, but there is a company that I've come across who has made that the actual value proposition, right? So they've identified there's around 10 steps to onboarding onto these protocols, and they've done it in the DeFi space predominantly, and you set up your wallet, you get your seed phrase, you get transfer of tokens, sign your signatures. It's really a flowchart that just makes your mind just policy. So what they've done is they've offered optionality, and they've said, listen, we understand that not everybody cares about doing these 10 steps, and some people want to participate in DeFi. They want Web2 familiarity because they don't really want to go through these individual steps. And with the security flaws in place and the problems we've seen happen across the world, that's okay. That's an okay sentiment to have. And I think we have to accept that there are people who aren't purists in this space that want that, and that's okay. So they've created Web2 familiarity, login, email. They've been the custodian. They have to be, right? They have to host a custodial wallet. They'll have Fireblocks backing them up, so you can export your private key if you really want to, which is great. So that optionality key is really important. And you've got to remember, single sign-on, what Google did, and I know that's a dirty word in this room, but what Google did for the Web2 space was make it a lot easier regardless of the implications of having single sign-on across the board. So doing something similar to that in the Web3 space, it's going to bring a large part of the market on board. And that's really important. So, great question. They're doing optionality, Web2 familiarity, and they're being custodians on their end. So that's how they're solving that problem.
I think I totally agree. I mean, if anyone's used Sportsbet recently, it's like, it takes you about 8 seconds to put a bet on. Like, it's insane. You know, these guys have got teams of people that are building out UI and UX to take your money. And I think the UI and UX researchers of that user experience point of view haven't come into crypto as much just yet. We're very much early adopters, we're financial people, technical people. I'm speaking at a research society conference in August and September in front of 800 of the biggest UI and UX roles in different companies across Australia, and one of the biggest things is going to be like, we need you guys to come to crypto, because it's such a shit show to try and explain to anyone how to buy an NFT. You know, they lose you on these 6 steps, so I totally agree. It's like...
Awesome. Did you have a question to ask? Yes, you did. Okay, awesome. Bar staff are giving me the wind up. They're getting a bit bored over there, so we might make this the last question.
Hey, probably a controversial question, but it's aimed at all 4 panel members. CBDCs, good or bad? And maybe perhaps a small rationale as to why you feel so.
CBDCs. CBDs. Not that. Not what you're thinking about. He didn't say oil. He said CBDCs.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm almost like every waking hour of my day is spending on crypto and NFTs. I barely spend time looking into CBDCs, to be honest, Leon. So yeah, I think we'll see some experiments in it, experiments or gradual rollouts of it. But to speak to the value proposition of it, or whether it will happen, I would say it will happen in some countries, and others will call it and just not pursue it, given so much of money or currency as we know it is already digital. Did
China launch their?
Yeah, I think
is that
rolling it out.
A couple of years ago they talked about it, I thought, but yeah.
I think there's definitely a purpose for it, and I definitely think there's a use case, but at the same time, I think we also take away the fact that, you know, the centralized currency essentially, and we're talking about a decentralized product. So, you know, when you then have a centralized product, that has been built from something that's decentralized, I think that's where you're going to find the difficulty. But I think if you can find a way to sort of really merge it in with traditional finance at the same time, I definitely think there's a lot of use cases there. I think we've seen how important crypto can be. If we just look at sort of the Russia-Ukraine situation, right? You know, no one's going to go over that border with cash, and I'm going to go over with gold. You know, they want something that they can stick in a ledger and put it in their pocket and just get across that border. So I do think that there could be value there, but how that works, you know, again, if we go back to regulation, we go back to the central banks and how they sort of put that in, they're going to want to have some form of complete control over that, and again, that's where, you know, it takes away from everything that we know with crypto at the moment. So I think it will be difficult, but there's a use case there for sure.
Awesome. Well, that's good. Thank you very much. So, just a quick one. Dimitri, is Dimitri here? Yeah, Dimitri's got his hand up over there. So, Dimitri's from Independent Reserve, and he's the new kid on the block there. And he's never really been to any of my meetups before, but I checked his wallet when he came in, and he's got his company credit card there. So that's awesome. So what we're going to do is, anyone who wants to come out and have Chinese on Independent Reserve's account, just come and see me, because we'll probably head out of here in, Jake, what, half an hour? Maybe a couple of beers before we go. And then Independent Reserve's going to buy us dinner. So, big round of Dimitri, new kid on the block. I'll probably get a call from Lysenko a little later on when it's, $1,000 of Chinese food, but that's all right. He's been a good guy tonight. So, other than that, I just want everyone to put their hands together. A round of applause for these four gentlemen. And a special thanks to Ben for organising tonight from Collective Shift. All my guys that are new need to get online and check it out. We'll get some personal discount codes happening. Just email me. Ben will look after us. And thank you for having me, Ben. Cheers.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, everyone. I got a message from Shane. You guys don't know how to drink. We've only spent $300, so head to the bar. We'll go second, third, fourth drink for free as well. Let's get that tab up before you bounce. And seriously, if you want more education, research, head over to Collective Shift. Send Shane a message, and we'll set you up with a discount on your membership. So thanks everyone for coming. Have a great night. Thank you.